First Spark was never ordinary, for this story was not meant to be confined to a script. It rose from the ashes of legend, a whisper from a 1,000-year-old myth where foxes with 9 tails prowled the borders of human dreams. There, in the folds of eternity, stood Lee Yun, a once mighty guardian spirit punished by fate, stripped of glory, yet chained to love's cruel decree. His face was that of Lee Dong-wook, sharp as the blade of destiny itself, and his eyes carried the weight of centuries spent searching for a soul lost too soon. Opposite him stood Nam Jia, played with unshakable fire by Jo Boa, a mortal woman haunted by shadows of her past lives, a woman who carried in her heart the echo of a promise no god could erase. It was not just television. It was a binding spell cast upon millions, a tale where every look burned like prophecy and every word resounded like scripture carved into stone. The drama tale of the Nine-Tailed became more than a story, it became a fairytale sown from agony, defiance, and the relentless pursuit of a love written not in ink but in blood and tears. Fans did not watch it as outsiders. They were swallowed whole, dragged into the Gumiho's cursed eternity, made to feel the weight of immortality pressed against fleeting mortal time. The myth itself was simple, yet cruel. A fox who once loved too deeply, punished for defying divine law, doomed to wander between worlds. A woman reborn across lifetimes, destined always to return to him, destined always to die too soon. But when Dong-wook and Boa breathed life into these roles, the tale no longer belonged to dusty folklore. It became alive, trembling, furious. His every stare was an ocean of grief held back by sheer will, and her every smile was a sunrise daring to pierce through centuries of night. Together, they blurred the line between legend and reality until no one could tell which was which. There were scenes that stopped time, not because of fantasy, but because of the truth they carried. The truth of loss, the truth of desperation, the truth of loving someone enough to chase them even through death. When Lee Yun cradled Nam Jia as though she was slipping away with every breath, fans felt their own hearts tearing open. When Jo Boa's character, trembling yet unbroken, defied monsters that towered over her, the audience knew they weren't watching fiction. They were watching a mortal woman daring to hold hands with an immortal fate. The rain fell heavy in one scene, drowning everything but the fire in their eyes. He reached for her, centuries of pain trembling in his hand. She leaned into him, carrying not fear but the quiet defiance of someone who had loved him before and would love him again. That kiss was not staged. It was war, it was surrender, it was resurrection. It was a moment so powerful that the world seemed to bow before it. Critics could not dissect it, for it was not written to be analyzed but to be felt. And then came the heartbreaks, the scenes where gods and demons pried them apart, where fate demanded sacrifice. Each separation cut sharper than any sword. Each death, each goodbye, was not an end but a reminder of how deep the roots of their love went. For every grave they dug, love climbed out, blooded but unbeaten. The fairy tale was not about escaping tragedy. It was about choosing love even when tragedy was inevitable. And that, perhaps, is why it felt so real. What made it mind-blowing was the collision of two worlds. Gumihos belonged to old fireside tales, whispered warnings about fox spirits luring mortals to their doom. But here was Lee Dong-wook, an immortal creature in the shape of a man, walking through modern city lights, his presence bending reality around him. And here was Jo Boa, not a helpless maiden, but a modern woman who met myth not with fear but with defiance. She did not bow to the supernatural, she stood against it, reminding the fox that eternity meant nothing without love shared in the now. It was myth draped in neon, folklore sewn into skyscrapers, a fairy tale reborn in a world of traffic lights and smartphones. And yet, within that modernity, the myth burned brighter. The fox's tales, the shimmering realm between life and death, the gods who judged love too dangerous to survive, they all stood as towering symbols of what every human heart has known, that love is fragile, fleeting, and often punished, but still we cling to it. Still we reach across time, across pain, across destiny. There was one moment etched forever into the memories of fans. When Lee Yun, battered, blooded, prepared to sacrifice himself, his eyes found hers across the chaos. The music thundered, the world collapsed, but in that heartbeat, silence fell. He was no longer a Gumiho. She was no longer a mortal. They were two souls breaking every rule of heaven just to hold on to each other. That scene alone turned countless viewers into believers, not of gumihos, not of gods, but of love that bends reality itself. But what made this tale extraordinary was not just the on-screen passion. It was the alchemy of Lee Dong-wook and Jo Bo-ah themselves. Their chemistry did not feel crafted. It felt inevitable. He, with his quiet sorrow wrapped in elegance. She, with her fiery vulnerability that refused to yield. Together, they spun a tension so raw that every interaction felt like a storm waiting to break. When their eyes locked, it wasn't acting. It was collision. It was centuries folding into seconds. It was myth made flesh. Fans still talk of the way his hand trembled before touching her, as though the weight of eternity rested in that single choice. They speak of the way she looked at him as if daring him to believe in a tomorrow that fate had always stolen. They remember the laughter between battles, the softness between wars, the way every small gesture carried the weight of infinite reincarnations. Even when the drama ended, the myth did not. Online forums overflow with theories, rewrites, fanfiction where the story continues. Some imagine new lives where Lee Yun and Nam Jia meet again, free of curses, free of gods. Others cling to the heartbreak, replaying the tragedies as if to remind themselves that true love is not always about happy endings, sometimes it is about choosing to love anyway, knowing the end will break you. The myth lives on, not because the show told it, but because Dong-wook and Bo-ah embodied it. They made audiences believers, not in gumihos, but in love that transcends death itself. Even now, whispers echo. Did you see the way he looked at her? Did you feel the way she clung to him? On YouTube, edits of their scenes gather millions of views, each replay a resurrection of the spell. On social media, fans compare their chemistry to old legends of star-crossed lovers, Romeo and Juliet, Orpheus and Eurydice, lovers doomed by gods yet immortalized in myth. But this tale, fans argue, feels sharper, deeper, because it exists in both the ancient and the modern. Because it is not bound to parchment but lives in neon streets, in trembling kisses, in stolen moments replayed over and over. And perhaps that is the true fairy tale. Not one of glass slippers and ballrooms, but one where immortals break for mortals, where mortals fight for immortals, where love is not gentle but devastating, yet worth every scar. A tale where destiny is cruel, but love is crueler still, refusing to let go, refusing to bow, refusing to die. Lee Dong-wook and Jo Bo-ah turned myth into reality, fantasy into prophecy. They reminded us that love, once written in legends, does not fade with time. It transforms. It survives. It returns, lifetime after lifetime, clawing its way through curses and deaths, demanding to be remembered. And as long as fans replay those scenes, as long as hearts tremble at the memory of their embrace, the myth will never die. It will live on as a fairy tale not of kings and castles, but of a fox and a woman who refused to stop loving each other, even when the universe itself demanded they part. Because in the end, Tale of the Nine-Tailed was not just a drama. It was a contract. A promise whispered through the screen, that love, once written in myths, can become eternal if enough hearts believe in it. And believe, they did. They still do. They always will. What struck fans most was how even the quietest moments between Lee Dong-wook and Jo Bo-ah seemed to hold the weight of 1,000 love stories. Their first rain scene wasn't drenched in dialogue, but in silences that screamed louder than words. She reached for his hand not out of necessity, but instinct, and the way his eyes darted to her fingers, then lingered, told a story the script didn't have to explain. The rain became more than water falling from the sky. It was a curtain hiding two people who might have forgotten the world beyond that embrace. Then came the library scene, where a single glance across rows of ancient texts felt like an arrow piercing centuries of myth. Jo Bo-ah's character, unaware of the depth of the gumiho's loneliness, leaned just a fraction closer, and Lee Dong-wook's breath caught in a way only the most observant fans noticed. That half-second, that invisible tremor in his chest, was replayed endlessly online. Did you see his eyes? That wasn't acting, fans insisted. But perhaps the most unforgettable was the lantern-lit night by the river. Her voice quivered as she asked if fate could really bring two souls together, and his silence stretched longer than any script would allow. His gaze, soft yet burdened, seemed to answer everything without a word. For that moment, no one saw the mythical Gumiho and the fearless heroine, they saw Lee Dong-wook and Jo Bo-ah, two actors who had unknowingly written their own legend. It was in these stolen pauses, these fleeting breaths between lines, that their story transcended fiction. And that is why fans still whisper, the myth didn't end with the drama, it only began.